Yeah, we're on, man. We're on air. Today's episode brought to you by Pepto-Bismol, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. But it sounds like I'm not the only one in the bunch.
It's crazy. Sounds like this whole race has been defined by illness, huh?
Yeah, but obviously there was the news about Remco, but then also Pinot was saying in the media that he's been sick. Um, and I think that that's always a challenge in a 3 week race because you're really like on the edge,
Yeah.
kind of at the peak of your form. You're probably really lean, and you have all the stress of 3 weeks. But also like it's been raining every day and quite cold. So it's also exposes you in the sense that, I mean, this stage to Gran Sasso, it's like that stage was 6.5 hours in the cold rain. And, you also don't, even something as simple as like maybe there's cow shit on the road that sprays on your
Yeah.
bottle, and then you take a drink, and then all of a sudden you have, a bad stomach for a few days, which, I've been vomiting and not feeling well the last day or two. Um, and I don't know where that came from, but it's like in some regards, it's probably lucky that it happened now when, yesterday in the TT, I can go as easy as I want as long as you make time cut. And then today's a rest day. And then a couple, they're not easy stages the next couple days, but they should come to like a sprint or reduced bunch sprint. So you can kind of survive. But, if something like this happens in the last week, then I think you end up going home. So,
Yeah. Well, I guess we didn't even do an intro. Eric's here. Thanks for joining us, Eric, and obviously thanks to Joe at the Giro. 1 week in, I guess you have 9 racing days in already. Is that? Did you go? Was it
yeah,
stage 9
it's
yesterday?
always, yeah, it's always like numerically, you're kind of almost to halfway. But it's funny because there's kind of particularly with the Giro, this like crescendo in how hard it is, in the sense that, I mean, so far we had two TTs, a number of sprint days, a couple mountain finishes, but actually neither of those mountain finishes were really raced from a GC
Halfway is really
perspective.
the last week, right?
Yeah, in terms of like how hard it is, halfway is like stage 16 because that's when you really get into the thick of the Giro tends to stack the stages at the back. And um, I think that last week there's one day from Valsugana that's like flat, sort of down a valley all day. But other than that, it's pretty much really big, 5 to 6,000 meter mountain days every day. So, and this next week is kind of a mixed bag. Some sprint stages, maybe some stages that suit like a breakaway rider. And then we also have, I think before the rest day, maybe the only mountain day is there to Crans, Montana. We have the stage in Switzerland. So yeah, provided also, I mean, I saw some photos from some of the passes there, and it looks like they've got a lot of snow. So provided that the weather is cooperative, then yeah.
So we started off talking about people being sick. Just real quick, you have a full team right now, or has anybody gone home?
Yep. No, everyone's here. We had a couple guys that weren't feeling too good a couple days ago, but they seem to be over it. It seems like I'm the only one that's kind of been suffering with a bit of like gastro symptoms for a bit longer. But actually today I kind of held all my food down, so that's a start.
Do they give you anything like Pepto Bismol? Are you taking any medicine?
Um, so at the we started, the doctor gave me I think it's called Normix. It's like not an antibiotic, but like something, if you have some sort of like, I think bacterial
Yeah.
gut thing going on, it's supposed to kind of kill that. And then today we tech this morning I took this it's called Smecta, diosmectide. It's like I don't know exactly what it is, but I remember also in UAE they gave it to me when I had like a stomach issue, and it seems to kind of settle everything down. I think it's actually clay based, but I'm not sure how it works.
Interesting. We always joke around about
Yeah.
like this stuff in Europe
But
being
other than
like
that, just kind of,
a little bit different from the American stuff, you know?
yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is like, and luckily we're in a couple days where I can avoid it, is like eating really simply, and things like gels and maltodextrin and all that, like when you have a stomach bug, is not helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, yesterday I did the TT, just drank some water, rolled around on the rollers for 15 minutes and went. And then today, yeah, it's just kind of, we did an hour and a half, stopped at a coffee shop of who's a friend of one of the guys in the team, and yeah, that's about it.
Did you have
Awesome.
coffee?
I actually had a decaf coffee.
Mm.
We're already getting
I
into
think if
like
I had a caffeinated coffee,
Don't tease the questions.
exactly.
Yeah. So Joe, this is Grand Tour number 13, if I count correctly, right?
yeah, I think
Yep.
that's right. And Giro number 8.
And Giro number 8. And where I'm going with this is
I finished all of them but one.
right. Yep. Just that one unfortunate, 2 years ago?
Yep, 2021.
The question I was going to ask based on that. So you're kind of an experienced guy here, and it does seem like this year the illness is hitting an impact, maybe at a level that maybe you haven't seen. Of course, we just got over the COVID era. We know that's still around. Your issues are not related to that. It's more like you talk about the rain, the fact that the bunch has really been grouped very closely. There's been a lot of
Yeah.
Peloton riding, right? And is there anything different like this year post COVID era that the teams are doing to try to stay healthier, or is this completely, it's all environmental and there's really nothing you can do?
I think that in general, probably if you were to kind of come into like our bubble, so to speak, at a Grand Tour, you would probably be surprised how I don't want to say paranoid is the word, but as an example, like today we were at a coffee shop, and obviously everyone knows the Giro's in town, and there are a lot of people coming wanting to take photos and whatever, and the directors were trying to kind of like keep people away. So even just in general, like it's we use hand sanitizer before and after the meals, and um, they try and be really careful, like the soigneurs when they're making bottles and making food, about keeping everything clean. All the teams have chefs, because that's also a really important point in that, you need to know where the food's coming from and how it's prepared. So I would say we've backed off a little bit in the sense that, like, it's not that everyone's wearing a mask everywhere. But in general, in pro cycling, I think the riders kind of learn to be very risk averse when it comes to illness, because you as a rider, but also the team, invest a lot in something like a Grand Tour, and maybe you're working all season for that focal point in your year, and then if you get sick, it can kind of make all that work a bit of a waste. So
And that's
I
a big
wouldn't say that we're
change
doing
from
anything.
2015, 2016, right? Like things were a little more relaxed back then, right?
Yeah, in general, I would say the the sport's become a lot more professionalized, even in the time I've been a rider. And what I think you see a lot of is also the increase of, I mean, the amount of staff. The number of riders in a team is more or less stayed the same, but the amount of staff has really swelled, with just all these other things that teams are looking at. I mean, before I turned pro, I would say up until like 2008 or 9, it wasn't that common for teams to have chefs, and now every team has maybe two or three. And a lot of teams, as an example, eat on the kitchen truck, and they never actually come in the hotel to eat.
Mhm.
which I think is partly because, it's nice to not see other teams and, be bothered by people, but also it's that, you can keep control of a clean environment and you probably have less incidents of, people getting sick.
The stories I hear, of the eras before you, where the teams would literally eat the buffet that the hotel provided. It's just unthinkable now, from a
Yeah.
nutrition standpoint and a sanitary standpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We see the shifting gears a little bit. The blue skies behind you. You haven't had a lot of that. I think you and Eric were talking about that before I got on. See our blue skies on your rest
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, exactly. I probably would have preferred blue sky tomorrow, and I hear it's going to rain, but yeah, I mean, it's not something obviously we can control. I'm sort of hoping that last week we get some good weather, because I'd also rather have rain in the first week or first and second week where we have a bit more rolling and flat stages. But, if it's raining when you're in the Alps in May, it can be pretty, well, sometimes it's not even rain, it's snow. So uh, if we have to put up with it, I would take the trade of putting up with it again for another week and having a nice final week. But we'll see. I mean, it's kind of like everyone has to deal with it, and it's easy. In some ways, it's like I think you just have to not think about it too much, because you can kind of not demotivate yourself, but you know, in some ways, it's like you also have to think that there are some guys who maybe are less motivated for the race when they see that it's raining, when they're sitting
Oh yeah,
inside the bus. And it's like,
yeah,
if anything, you should think of it as an opportunity.
yeah. That I heard in some of the commentators say that the roads were particularly slick in the area of Italy you guys were riding in when it was raining.
Yes. In the South, they don't get that much rain typically. So the road, I think especially because in Europe also there's more prevalence of diesel cars. And so the road surface tends to get a bit oily. And when it doesn't rain, then that oil kind of
Yeah.
stays there. And yeah, it's really treacherous. I mean, you saw, I think it was stage 5 that actually the last 7Ks of the stage was completely straight. And there was
Yeah.
a crash at 7K to go, 2.5K to go, and at the finish line. I'm sure everyone saw, the crash of Cav right there at the finish line. But, you know, we can always talk about like the finishes being dangerous and road furniture and whatever. But in this case, the finish was quite straightforward, and there were still crashes everywhere. But the the roads, especially in the south, when it rains, are really treacherous. And in that first week, the bunch is still really nervous. And when you have that kind of nervousness in the bunch combined with those road conditions, it can make for a lot of crashes.
Eric was mentioning changes to kind of protocols from being sick, whatever it might be, over the years, especially post COVID. What about changes of behavior of the riders in the peloton pre and post COVID? I hear commentators talk about that sometimes.
Yeah, I think that my feeling, and I think what most guys would say, is that the racing's become more aggressive over the years. And I feel that there's also maybe more crashes. And I don't know if that's due down to rider behavior or, I mean, I remember at the Tour de France last year, Christian Prudhomme at the rider meeting before the race, they have this, kind of presentation they put together. And one of the things they said was that there was 100% increase in, it was either the last 10 or 15 years, of the amount of road furniture in France over that
Crazy.
period. Which it's ironic because actually sometimes these traffic calming devices, particularly, I mean, I live in Nice, in a French city, and there's a big push in the French cities right now to have a lot more cycling infrastructure. But that cycling infrastructure comes in the way of bike paths, and particularly ones where they actually physically separate it from the road. Not that you just have a bike lane, but they're trying to, put trees between the bike lane and the roadway, which is great for inner city cycling and that's really the big push in France right now. But at at the same time, for racing, we use the whole road, and it's not
Right.
that they can just remove the trees or the barriers for the race to come through, and it makes it really dangerous for us. And I think it's a combination of, I think that the racing is more aggressive, and we race faster all day, every day, but also that there is more kind of road furniture and traffic calming devices, um, which are meant to make cycling safer, but in the context of bike racing, it definitely makes it more dangerous.
Yeah.
Particularly with how fast you all go these days and the size of the peloton. I mean, that's something I think they're going to have to take a look at and look at the number of teams allowed in these races and really rethink,
Yeah. Well,
how
and the
big of
races are going faster, I mean, and if you think even like just what bikes and clothing looked like even 10 years ago compared to today. I saw a video that GCN put out, and they tested a bike from 10 years ago and today on, I think it was a 6-minute climb,
Mm-hmm.
doing the same watts in the same conditions with the same rider. And don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was like 18 seconds difference.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah.
Faster for,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, that's not that long. Like if we think 10 years, that's not that long of a time period. But also the clothing and everything. So, the speeds are higher, and yeah, I mean, actually it's been interesting. Adam Hansen is now the new president of the Riders Union, and he was a rider quite recently. He retired only a few years ago. And I remember when he was a rider, he was always kind of the one rallying the riders to come to a decision sometimes when there was something dangerous right before the race, so that we could have a change on the day. And he's also one of the he's an intelligent guy outside of just cycling, and I know he's been kind of pushing in his new presidency to kind of look at some of the things that maybe we can change to make the racing safer. One of the things that's been talked about is, extending the 3K rule to 5 and taking GC time at 5K. But there's a lot of these things that I think you could do. In the end, it's always going to be a dangerous sport, but yeah, I mean, I think if there's something you can do, it's nice. And I mean, I remember a year or two ago in the tour, Mark Madio was talking on French TV about, it's something that we do need to address, because you watch the first week of Grand Tours and there's so many of these sometimes horrific crashes that at some point you might start to see that, as we've seen with American football, a lot of parents don't want their kids to play American football anymore because, there's been the whole story of concussions. And it's like, if parents turn on the Tour de France and see the crashes in the first week, it's like, you don't want your kid doing that,
Yep.
because it's not safe.
Yeah, for sure.
This actually is a good jumping off point. I asked ChatGPT to give me some questions for a pro cyclist that were not cliche or routine. Most of them were garbage, but there actually was one question related to this. And it was, how has technology changed since you started your career, and how has it affected the way you approach racing? And we talked about this a little bit, but you've been in, pro about 10 years, and it is pretty crazy, the technology change that we've seen just in 10 years. What are some things you like about the technology or don't like, and how has it affected how you approach racing?
I mean, I think everything's become more measured and calculated. One thing that I started using more frequently this year, the team has a partnership with Garmin, and we have these smartwatches that do HRV. And I remember back in 2015, I had actually bought an espresso machine from Rocket, and the guy that owns the company, he invited me to drive over to his house, and then the next day I picked it up from the factory. And he was asking me, some questions about training, and
I know where this
son,
is going. Yes.
was also racing, and he was like, there's this new thing called HRV, and it's the amount of time between heartbeats. And I'm thinking, like, you're talking about heart rate, right? And he's, no, it's like HRV. And I hadn't heard anything about it at the time. But, you know, it's actually something like that's quite interesting because it does seem to have a reasonably strong correlation to maybe not to performance, but to underlying maybe sickness or stress or, being overly fatigued from racing or training, or maybe, you don't have your diet dialed in. So something like that, I think is pretty useful. At least, I mean, there's times where like, okay, in the race, you have to go race
Right.
your bike every day and do what you need to do. But perhaps in the context of training, it can just be another one of these things that's a guide. And it's not only that. I mean, now, like, when I first started seeing this, I was thinking like, I'm not going to do this. This would break my head. But now, for example, we have this app on the phone that the nutritionist put in the carbohydrate for each meal and also for the race. And then they have every sort of food programmed into the app. And then we have a gram scale at, all the meals. And you weigh like, okay, I had this much pasta. Okay, you click on white pasta boiled. It's like this many grams of carbohydrate per 100 grams. And then it tracks everything. And then they get the power file every day. And then based on what we reported that we ate in the race, then they kind of adjust how much we should have at dinner or breakfast, whatever. And I mean, even just a few years ago, that seemed like a bit extreme, but to be honest, I think that no one is not doing that now. So yeah, it's just become a lot more kind of calculated, I guess, which some might say it's taking the fun out of it, but I also think like, you know, we're seeing higher and higher levels of performance, and I think some of it is down to that, like just that everyone is doing things better than we did even 5, 10 years ago.
And I'm guessing to link this back to your coffee shop ride, is that why you didn't have? That's why you had decaf?
Well, I had decaf a little bit because of just the stomach issues.
Mm.
Like we all know caffeine can be a bit of an accelerant.
Yeah.
So
Accelerant.
yeah, I thought better stay away from the caffeine today. But
Yeah.
also just yeah, I mean, you have a lot of stress from the race, and like, okay, a coffee or two in the morning I think is okay, but you know, you also have to think in the context of over essentially 1 month of racing. Even if you take, for example, caffeine in the race, it's something that like there is a cost to that, and you have to kind of weigh the
Yep.
cost benefit. Like perhaps it's a stage that you need to go all in, but then it's like if it's impacting your sleep, that's not something you want to do every day. Uh, so yeah, you just kind of have to weigh all these things, and but at the same time, it's also a balance. Like you can't overthink this stuff because in the end, like the actual action of being a bike racer is a lot more kind of like instinctual and like animalistic than being so calculated, you know?
Well, I'm going to use you as inspiration on my third cup of coffee today. And Jared knows this. My
All
HRV
right.
in the mornings, like today was 21, which I'm a little on the low side anyways, but it's definitely my parasympathetic nervous system is completely jacked up.
I'll tell you
Jared,
one thing
Right.
that one thing that I noticed with I was using Whoop and with for a long time, and with some of the guys that I coach, the one of the biggest things that I noticed was that we'd get a red flag like 2 days before they'd get sick, and while we
Yes, I've noticed that.
yeah, you wouldn't necessarily like change the workouts based on, but if you could get two, low HRV days, and and then 2 days later they're sick. And we saw that with COVID too. Before they would get a positive COVID test, you'd start to see the HRV numbers tank, which I thought was pretty interesting. And the
Right.
other,
I've just
go ahead.
go ahead.
I
I've
just
noticed the HRV will drop a couple days before, and also sometimes the temperature. Maybe you don't have a fever, but your temperature is up.
Yeah, yep. And then the other big thing, for the with the HRV, while it didn't necessarily, and I continue to use it, it doesn't necessarily like make me change the way I'm working out, but it does improve my sleep hygiene. You know, I'm like hell bent on getting in bed and sleeping well. So
That's something that I think it helps is like I'm probably I mean my wife would say I'm like overly routine, which probably just comes from being a pro cyclist. Like everything is about routines and structure and whatever. But I do think it can serve as like a reminder to, you know, put the phone down, turn off the light, you know, not having coffee or caffeine like in the afternoon,
yeah,
because it does kind of provide some hard data as to how you slept. And yeah, I mean, that I definitely think makes a difference, especially, okay, one night of bad sleep isn't going to kill you, but 2 weeks will.
I'm sure. So I know when we were texting earlier, we didn't want to keep you too long on the phone, especially since it's your rest day. We want you to get the rest, and we definitely want you kicking butt at the end of the week. But before we close out, we definitely have to do my top 10 questions. I'm gonna find out.
Hit me.
Okay, I gotta get a marker though to check how many you get right, because I want to see if you're gonna pass or fail. Hold on. All right. So some of them we actually touched on. We're gonna go fast, and you got to answer quick, Joe. Sorry about this. Coffee or tea?
Lightning round.
Yeah, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Correct.
Coffee.
Volvo or Saab?
Volvo.
Correct. Cake or pie?
Pie.
Incorrect. Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin?
Led Zeppelin.
Incorrect. Rim brake or
I like both.
Rim brake or disc brake?
Disc brake.
Incorrect. Florida or Texas?
Oh, I guess Texas. But I don't really like either.
Incorrect. Tubeless or tubular?
Tubeless.
Correct. Grapes or olives? You're in Italy.
Olives.
Correct. Crushing it. Window or aisle?
Aisle.
Correct. Electric scooter or taxi?
Electric scooter.
Definitely. And then finally, there's no correct answer. Tour de France or Vuelta?
Tour de France.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, you did. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. It looks like you like got a 60, which I think is a D minus. But
not in today's world. They round that up.
I know how it works, because he can go back through. Like I give him the test, I send it back to him, and he can correct all of his answers. So,
right.
Well, Joe, we really, really appreciate you taking the time with us. It's always fun to, obviously, we're lucky. Eric and I are lucky, and a couple other guys, to get to chat with you outside of this Zoom call. But I know there are a ton of people who are begging me to put these videos up. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I hope your stomach feels better, and I hope you crush it in the last
week.
Yeah.
We've got some big mountain stages coming. So, and I mean, in a way, maybe I'm lucky in that if you were going to have this kind of stomach bug hit you, having it like into the TT and a rest day and then a couple sprint days is probably about the best time it could happen. So yeah, keep it upright. Hopefully get over this, and then have a good last week.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, keep in touch. We'll talk to you soon, and start feeling better, buddy.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.